upper body, arms, and so forth was Medo-Persian Empire. Brass belly was the Greek Empire, and then the legs of iron and iron mixed with clay was Rome. But Nebuchadnezzar didn't know that when he first had the dream. As we noted last week, he set the stage by saying, you all are going to tell me the dream and the meaning. And as we noted last week, the wise men said, basically, that's not the way this works. You tell us the dream, we tell you the meaning, is what they said. His response to say, well, I see you're stalling for time, and if you're not going to tell me the meaning, I'm going to put you all to death. Well, we noted last week as we were closing out that putting them to death meant the death of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which is what we usually remember. Never have understood that. We call Daniel by his Hebrew name. We call Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah by their Babylonian names. But nonetheless, all of them would die as well because they are wise men. They're part of that group. Well, it's at that point in time that an interesting thing transpires, and we want to notice that. Beginning in verse 14, they've gone out to kill all the wise men, and here it comes, Daniel chapter 2, verse 14. Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Now, I want us to pay close attention to this. Daniel is already envisioning that he will receive the answer. He trusts God that much that if he prays, the answer is going to come. Now that, to me at least, is a challenge to my faith. I don't know how many of you, maybe unlike me, pray every time thinking, well, God's going to work this all out. I know he can. Don't misunderstand me. But I wonder if he will. In my case, maybe I won't doubt my own worthiness, which none of us are worthy for what the Lord gives us. But I mean, I'm not. I don't even feel as worthy as other people, perhaps, when I pray. And so I think, well, he's going to prioritize this, and the really worthy people are going to get the answers, and the rest of us, well, we may not. It's I guess what I'm thinking. Daniel has no such lack of confidence. Instead, he is extremely confident. He says, if you give me time, I'll have the answer. Okay, but how does he say that? Well, go on to the next verse, beginning at verse 17. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Have you ever asked God for mercy? Some have. I wonder if others have. Again, I don't know if we may not have the sense we're worthy in some sense of the word. I don't know. But here is Daniel asking his companions to join him, and they're all going to ask for mercy. Now, mercy means what? What do you think of when you hear the word mercy? What? Can't help yourself? Is that what you said? Okay, and by the way, that's exactly right. Mercy is a depiction of bending or stooping to help the helpless. So envision somebody who is desperately ill. Maybe they have cancer. Maybe they're receiving treatments for that, and they're just, as my mama used to say, weak as a dish rag. And they want just a cup of water. Or they want some other little, something that almost seems insignificant. I mean, anybody could take care of that, couldn't they? Well, maybe not this person. Mercy is bending or stooping to help that person that cannot help him or herself. Daniel and his three companions recognize we can't get ourselves out of this. You ever thought about what it takes to get somebody out of addiction? What is the normal comment? You may have a variation of it, but what's the comment? What are we going to have to get this person out of addiction? A support group, that would be helpful and is used very often. What do we have to have from the person? What? Oh, yeah. Now, I said you might use different words. I would. You're correct on that. She said a confession, a recognition you're guilty, that kind of thing. My explanation of that, it's the same idea, is you got to hit bottom. You got to know you're on the bottom. You got to know you can't get up, that you're not going to get up by yourself. Until they reach that point, you will not help them. In fact, you can become, the individual in a codependent relationship. And in a codependent relationship, what happens is that one person gets their thrills in life and they're building up in life by helping someone else who's helpless. And unfortunately, usually what happens in that relationship is if the other person starts to come up, then this person does something to put them back down. It's a terrible, terrible thing to watch. I actually counseled 2 alcoholics married to each other for a couple of years, and that's a double codependent relationship. What I discovered was in that relationship, somebody's got to be drunk all the time. Either the husband will be drunk and the wife would be the strength and so forth, or if he got sober, then she got drunk. You couldn't get them out of it. Well, what's the problem? They don't see the bottom. They don't know they're on it. They don't ever recognize it. Here comes Daniel, and he's not in the same type situation. Don't misunderstand me. He's not an addict or something like that, but he sees the bottom. It's there. I cannot get out of this hole that I am in. My friends and I cannot get out of this hole. We've got to pray. Brethren, I propose to you that is an attitude that would enhance all of our prayer lives. The recognition that I need God. That's basically where we are. We talk about all that. So he consults with them, and they join him, as is evident here. They're going to seek mercies from God. That's another way of saying they're going to pray. They're going to ask God for this thing. So then we find, verse 19, then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells in him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand. What do you get out of that? What's the lesson for me? What's the lesson for you in what just happened? Everybody's got allergies like I do. You all gone to sleep, I can tell. What about it? Well, could you say God answers? Could we begin there? God will answer. Now, He's going to answer in accord with wisdom. He's going to answer for the best. Sometimes that means I'm going to get a no. We've talked a little bit about that before. We may come to it again. In the New Testament, if we get far enough along in Paul's prayers, we naturally will come to that. But I think there's a second lesson. And right here, I want to say I am thankful to be at Sywell Road for a lot of reasons. But one of those is that the elders get up and they don't just tell about the sick, they tell about those that got well. What are we going to do with that? Thank you. Thank you. You answered our prayers. Thank you. I am reminded of the story of the 10 lepers that came to Jesus. They wanted to be healed, remember? He told them to go show yourselves to the priest, which, by the way, the implication of that's quite interesting because you only showed yourself to the priest once you've been diagnosed. You only showed yourself to the priest if you think you're over it. So Jesus is sending them to fulfill the law. They've got to show themselves to the priest. You remember what happened, right? 10 were cured, right? How many came back and said thank you? One. That's not a good percentage. Anyway, you're looking at it, that is not a good percentage. Brethren, let us resolve right here, right now, to be more thankful to God for what He has done for us. Well, I think we spend too much time thinking about what's not been answered yet. Well, it may not be time yet for that to be answered. But what about what He has answered? What about all the good that we have? And all the answers that we've had in the sense that people have gotten well and things like that. What about those things? Daniel goes into a rather extended offering of a prayer of praise, doesn't he? Where he praises God. So, you think about what Paul says in Philippians chapter 4, and when he talks about be anxious for nothing but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your request be made known unto God. Now watch that. With prayer and thanksgiving. How is it that I'm going to keep from being anxious all the time? Well, that's easy. I'm going to give thanks for what I have. Just try it sometime. Make a list of all the blessings you have. It's going to be interesting if you can list them all. Because if you're like me, you'll make a list and then you'll be driving down the road and think, I forgot this. I didn't put that on it. I didn't put the other on it. There's all kinds of things that we have as blessings. We ought to give thanks. Okay, so now he knows the answer. He goes to the king. And notice how he approaches the king. I'm sorry, I told you my allergies are on the run, and you just have to put up with it. It's been a long time since I've had a night like this where they're this strong, but I'm okay. I feel fine. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to kiss anybody tonight, okay? Except maybe Teresa, but she already lives with me, so if I've got something worse, she's already got it. 24. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Now, I see a little element here that maybe we miss sometimes. I know I have on occasions reading this. And that is, Daniel's concern is not just for himself, and it's not just for his companions, it's for all the wise men. Now, don't you find that a little bit ironic, because it's these same wise men who in chapter 5 chapter 6, set Daniel up to get him killed. It's these same fellas. But Daniel is concerned about other people, and we should be in our prayers as well. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Remember the requirements here. You got to tell me the dream, and you got to tell me the interpretation. Okay, so are you able to make known to me the dream? That's really the first question. And the second is, and the interpretation. So here comes the answer. Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. Please notice, when Daniel gets the answer to prayer, who gets the credit for the interpretation of the dream? God does. Not Daniel. God does. And it's Daniel that gives him the credit. I won't go into this too much, but if you know much about preachers, there are preachers. You do not have one of them. There are preachers who, when everything's going gangbusters with the church where they are, well, they take all the credit. And when it's going bad, they say the elders are the ones that caused it. No, if it's going well, God did it. Paul said, the one that plants, the one that waters are not anything. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, but God that gives the increase. So who is it that really deserves the praise when we do well here or anywhere? God does. And Daniel gives him the praise. I'm not going to go on and tell all about the whole dream, what it meant. I'll remind you simply that he talked about, basically those are four kingdoms that we're talking about. These are world-dominating kingdoms, starting with Babylon, which is the head. It's the most powerful, according to Daniel's dream, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel's interpretation. Then Medo-Persian, then Greece, then Rome. Now, Rome was the shatterer. And if you read the text, especially go on, we're going to pick up another dream later. When you read those dreams, Rome is the one that just shatters other nations. But even Rome is going to collapse. What's going to happen? A little stone cut out without human hands. That means God cut it out. It's going to break all those kingdoms down. They're going to turn to powder, and the kingdom of Jesus Christ will occupy or dominate the world. Turn to chapter 6, if you would. Chapter 3, of course, is the three Hebrew men, not Daniel, but the other three in the fiery furnace. Chapter 4 is Nebuchadnezzar's second dream, out of which he learned, I think, two things. One, God rules in the kingdom of man and appoints over it whomever he will. That is certainly there. If you go through that chapter and underline, you're going to find it about 4 times, I think, in that chapter. But he also learned about humility, which is very, very important. Belshazzar comes along chapter 5. Interestingly enough, Daniel basically says, your father. Now, this is the father in the kingship. Not father in the sense that he is his descendant physically, because he's not. But father in occupying the throne. And Daniel talks to Belshazzar about the fact that Nebuchadnezzar learned that God's in control. But Belshazzar comes along, he doesn't exhibit that knowledge. And though that in one way has nothing to do with this prayer conversation we're having, it does have an important point within it. And that is that we have got to learn humility if we want God to answer. You look at 1 Peter chapter 5, and isn't that what he says? Look, James also talks about the same thing. You got to humble yourselves in the sight of God if you want to be lifted up. That's a constant theme. Jesus, when he talked about going to the feast, you remember how he said that? Didn't he say something like, when you go to a feast, don't take the high spot, but instead take the lowest spot? So then the man who had the feast, if you're really supposed to be up higher, in front of everybody, he's going to come to you and say, oh, come, don't stay down here. Come on up a little bit higher. And all of a sudden now he's exalted. I'm sorry, I sometimes see American politics in these illustrations. And, maybe you shouldn't occupy the office of the Speaker of the House until you've won the vote. Maybe that would be smart. Make them ask you to come up. Don't insist it's yours by right. Okay, thank you. Don't take anything by that. I just see that. And maybe you don't see those things. But I see biblical examples in many things that apply so well. When I was in Valdosta, Georgia, I'll take a quick sidelight. I had a radio program in which I dealt with the news of the day using the Bible to talk about it. And it was not hard. You want to talk about all the bad in the headlines, just read the Minor Prophets. You almost don't have to go anywhere else. I ended up teaching a class at the church building on the Minor Prophets as seen in today's headlines. It's fascinating. All you got to do is take a newspaper for the length of the class, if you don't have one already, and you're going to find illustrations of every minor prophet that there is, in the sense of the word. It's just rich. The Bible's still applicable. That's all I'm saying. Chapter 6. Now we get back to prayer. You remember this one. Beginning of verse 1, it pleased Darius. Who is Darius, by the way? He's a Mede. He is a Mede that rules under the auspices of another, only this time we're talking about a Persian fellow by the name of Cyrus, not Cyprus, but Cyrus. And he's ruling because Cyrus has put him there. If you remember Daniel's later vision, you may remember that one side was higher than the other, and one of the animals more powerful looking. Well, that's Persia was stronger than Media. And that's the image that God had. God understood all that. He knew all of that. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. I'm not sure what excellent spirit carries with it. I can think of some ideas. One, he may have been easy to get along with, for one thing. You've worked with that kind of person. You've worked with the other guy too, probably. The other thing is what they're about to say about him, and that is he's got a good spirit in the sense that he considers himself the servant of God and then the servant of the king. And you're not going to catch Daniel cheating in anything. That's a pretty good spirit. Especially in our era, that would be a really good spirit. So verse 4, so the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Here's a fella that whatever he's asked to do, he does it. It's just that simple. He's faithful, not just to God, he's faithful to the king. He does the will of the king. So they can't find anything to accuse him of. Most people, you dig far enough into their lives, they've got a skeleton in the closet. But not Daniel, apparently. That's the way it's put. I'm not saying he was perfect. I'm just saying from the human viewpoint, you couldn't find a flaw in the man. So these governors and satraps throng before the king, verse 5. Then these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Let me ask you a question I read one time, I don't even remember where. If they brought you or me up on charges today for being a Christian, could they convict me? Could they convict you? See, you could convict Daniel, but how are you going to convict him? You got to get him on something having to do with the worship of God, service to God. That's the only way you're going to get him. And I find that powerful, really. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the councils and advisors, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast in the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. A couple of things to notice. First of all, notice that people that want to submarine somebody else are usually liars. We have all talked to you. Well, all? What about Daniel? Anybody talk to him? Well, no, it doesn't appear that they did. I wonder how he'd have responded if they had of. In a good way, I'm sure, but no, they didn't talk to him. That's number one. Number two, notice that all people that want to get their way tend to be flatterers. I would caution all of us. Look, you don't have to insult people, but if they ask you, what do you think of my new outfit, and you don't like it, the best thing you can do is say, well, you sure got you one there, didn't you? Don't lie about it. Don't flatter. Remain honest. That's Daniel. He's an honest person, not these fellows. These fellows that want their way, they flatter. And unfortunately, the king falls prey to it. And that's another lesson, isn't it? On the flip side, if you would, on the side of the king, and that is beware that you don't let your ego get you in trouble. Because this king got in trouble. Why? Because the fella he wanted to be in the top spot was the very one they had targeted, but they made it look like they're going to give him a higher spot. They're going to make everybody recognize his greatness. And he fell for it. He signed the law. Now, what are they talking about, the law of the Medes and the Persians? The law of the Medes and the Persians was you couldn't revoke it. It is what it is. You will notice if you read the book of Esther that you're still dealing with the law of the Medes and the Persians there, and the law had already been passed that they could kill all the Jews on a certain day. You notice that when Mordecai and Esther get control, they don't change that law. They can't change that law. But what they do is that they make a law that says Jews get to defend themselves. And that was not in the original intent of the law, but it wasn't written in the law. And so the Jews defended themselves and slaughtered a number of people that were intending to slaughter them on that day. Interesting. Law of the Medes and Persians, you can't change it. Believe me, Darius is going to look for a way to do so. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, I will tell you very quickly that I have done some things in ignorance. And maybe on occasion, I've even done something good in ignorance. That is that I didn't know I was doing a good thing, but it turned out that way. Daniel knows he's about to violate the law. He's well aware of it. And yet, what does it go on to say? He went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks to his God, as was his custom since early days. A couple of things I see here. First of all, Daniel's custom was to pray 3 times a day, every day, from the time he was apparently a young boy. Number 2, he didn't try to hide. He always prayed with the windows open. What direction were they probably open? Well, if you know historically anything about the Jews, the windows are open toward Jerusalem. Even though Jerusalem's been demolished pretty well, he would have his windows open toward Jerusalem. He's praying toward the land that they hope to go back to. Then these men assembled, found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Well, they didn't have any trouble figuring that out, because the windows are open. They could see him. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians, that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him in the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. I am not convinced that Darius believed that. I'm going to tell you why. It's because of what comes next. I know he says it, but I don't know that he's got the confidence. But listen to what happens. Then the stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Now, the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? You see why I'm not convinced he really believed it. He at least had many doubts. You can tell by the way he approaches this. Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God send his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was also found innocent before him. And also, O king, I've done no wrong before you. Now the king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. Please notice that, because he believed in his God. That's the one he prayed to all the time. Did he get the answer to his prayers? Yes. Did God protect him? Yes. He did protect him. And he delivered him. And I think we need to bear that in mind. Now, let me ask you something. With God protecting you, is it possible you still will die a violent death because of your Christianity? Is that possible? Can you give me an illustration? Somebody in Scripture that would apply to? Who? Peter. That's historically known, and Jesus said it was going to happen according to John chapter 21, so I believe it happened. So Peter, there's one. Who else? Who? Jesus himself. Did he trust God? Yes. Did he deserve to die? No. But he did. So Jesus would be another one. Somebody else. I'm sorry, who? Stephen, Acts 7. Now you got Stephen. You could say Paul. We don't know how he died except historically, but he was like Peter. He died a very violent death. Historically, that's what they tell us about him. James, what about the James the Apostle? John's brother, did he die an easy death? No. He was killed with a sword. John the Baptist, what about him? Yeah. We got a pretty good list of people. And I don't bring this up to discourage us, but I bring it up to say, look, God has really not promised to deliver us in this life. You don't expect a preacher to say that, do you? But it's true. Now, he may deliver us in this life, but he may not. And we need to recognize that. Now, I bring that up because, brethren, sometimes we are staggered because so many prayers go up for this sister or this brother, and they die anyway. And we're staggered by it. Well, we don't have a promise we're going to live here forever, do we? I figure I'm going to die of something. There's some of you'd say, yeah, meanness, but whatever. That's a possibility, I guess. But we're all going to die sooner or later. You can't just think that if you just keep praying, somebody's going to live forever on earth. They're not going to. It's not going to happen. Now, will he deliver us in eternity? Oh, yeah, that's easy. Paul talks about that. Talks about how he delivered him the first time in his trial. And even though he knew he was dying, he knew he was already being offered. The time of his departure was at hand. What did he say? He delivered me and he will deliver me. What's he talking about? He's talking about heaven. He's not talking about living here, from now on. And he didn't live from now on here. So very important, I think, to see this. Now, some skeptics will come along and they'll say, well, those lions were old, they were gumming it. They didn't have teeth. Well, just read on. Because the ones that brought the special law to Darius, they and their families get thrown into the lion's den. And by the way, those dens were not, I always had envisioned like a pit. That's not the way they were built. Instead, it was more like a slope, going down inside of maybe a cavern, something like that. And before these men who brought this fake law to the king, before they could reach the bottom, they and their families were devoured. No, Daniel was delivered from real lions. He was spared. And you and I can expect that God will deliver us as well. And how is he going to do it? Well, again, I'm going to remind you of Paul. Sometimes he'll deliver us here. Sometimes he'll deliver us in the hereafter. All right, any questions? Because we're pretty much through with the Old Testament prayers. You have free reign. You can talk about the whole Old Testament on prayer. Yeah. Exactly. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in chapter 3, they say, our God's able to deliver us, but even if he can't, we're not submitting to you. Because they understood, apparently, we'll be delivered. Not the way we might first want, but we will be delivered. Okay, next week, Lord willing, we're going to talk about some of the Lord's parables, 2 of them at least, on prayer, because I think there's some great lessons there. And then the following week, if the Lord wills, we'll go into some of the prayers of Paul, which I think are pretty powerful and interesting to study. Thank you.